The aviation sector, yes, also somewhat predicated on that decision by the Central Bank of Nigeria, which happens to be our poll question for the week. Well, Mr. Chris Alegbe joins us now. He's an aviation expert. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you, Chamberlain.
Well, already reactions coming through expectedly about that decision, especially as it concerns the aviation sector, because, I mean, before now, we see them going through some challenges, and now this one. But of course, you will always have people who will say, no, this is not good, while some others think that, well, nothing wrong with it. But how does this affect, you think, the aviation sector?
Thank you. The first thing to say is that, for me, is that the central bank has no responsibility for the aviation sector. No responsibility. The responsibility, sole primary responsibility of central bank is to make sure that the financial system is stable, the stability of the financial system. And if there's any sector, anything that will impair their performance of this role, it's better they cut it off. It's better for the country that the financial system is stabilized than any other thing, because it has wider ramifications than any individual sector. The aviation sector is just a sector. So having said this, I don't think that the central bank has done anything basically wrong. It's remained within the ambit of its primary responsibility. You could say it's narrow. It's a different thing. Having said that, in the airline sector, subsector, or aviation, let's take the aviation sector, I don't think that the banks and the sector have done well.
How?
First and foremost thing is that the banks see the aviation sector the same way they see every other business. And so they treat it that same way. Most of the banks have unfortunately, no competence in the aviation sector. So they cannot sit down and analyze properly a proposal given to them. Many of them don't even think that it's necessary to engage those who know, consultants, even if on an ad hoc basis, to help them analyze a proposal on the aviation sector. And so they move ahead and treat it as any other sector, and then they falter. All the financing done by banks over the period in time, they have always faltered. Maybe there's only one, we have only one or two that have been quite successful.
What is peculiar about the aviation sector that banks don't seem to be taking into cognizance?
First and foremost, it's a place where return on investment, his profit is between 2% and 10% maximum. The airlines that make it very well, approach 10%. And there are few of them. Maybe you have a Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific, and maybe the airlines in the Middle East. These are the airlines that make, and one or two low freeze airlines that make this kind of profit. But basically, it's between 2% and 5%, 7%. That's what you find. And then when you go to take loans and it's 20% interest rate, how are you going to pay it?
I'm tempted
it's long term. The investment is long term.
I'm tempted to ask, why is that the case? Why is it that the profit margin is only between 2% and 10%? Because is it because there are no customers, or it's not very lucrative, or?
No. It's the nature of the industry. It is the nature of the industry. That's this is no question of there are customers, even those who fly millions and millions of customers, they still get to this point. You find that those who fly maybe fewer passengers, maybe not up to 2 million, make, in terms of return on investment, their profit margin is higher than the profit margin of those who may have flown 20 million.
And it has always been like this?
Yes. So now Ethiopian Airlines profit margin, it's higher than the British Airways profit margin. Yet British Airways is a mega carrier. Ethiopian Airlines is just maybe a large African carrier, so to say. So that's the nature of the industry. And so when you know what the returns are, what the profit margin is, and you go ahead and borrow at such an exorbitant interest rate, there's no way you are going to effectively service your loan. You become a debtor.
I thought they said the loans were the interest rate was between 2%, and it wasn't really that high.
No. You are talking about the intervention fund.
Okay, the intervention
The intervention fund that was even given by the
CBN.
central bank
Yeah.
wasn't directed at the airlines. Central bank was clear in the various presentations that made that is directed at the bank to ensure financial stability of the banks, because they found that airlines were owing banks huge amounts of money, and so they decided, okay, let us provide these funds through the banks. So the banks go and apply for these funds on behalf of the airline debtor, the debtor airline, and the banks get this money back, and then what it is, it stretches it out from the short-term loan period to about 15 years, and that kind of thing, with about maybe 6 months or whatever moratorium before ever they start paying. So the intervention fund was not designed specifically to help the airlines. It was designed to help the banks, to bring the banks back and give back the money that the airlines were owing the banks and allow them to restructure the financing. But the actual loans that the airlines take from the banks is 20% interest, sometimes 22% interest rate. And so that's why the airlines, all of them, went into trouble. Like I said, the banks don't have competence. Maybe there are 2 or 3 banks now that have established aviation desk. Many of them don't have an aviation desk. They just take it and analyze it. They see a proposal, where we go to this place, we go to this place, they sit down.
You know, people have always thought, sorry to butt in, people have always thought that aviation, the intervention fund were actually given to the airline and now you say no, it was actually meant for the banks,
yes,
to assist them.
Yes.
But Babatunde Omotoba has been speaking, former Minister of Aviation, and he says this CBN's directive blacklisting some companies that they want to call debtor companies would rather kill those companies instead of reviving them. Now, being an aviation expert, that's why we're trying to focus on the aviation industry, knowing that the government has been talking about so many kinds of reforms. Remember the last time we were also talking about how to improve on our safety. If the banks stop to give further credit to those in the sector, how much of damage will that cause?
It has already, the giving credit to them has already damaged the sector. It has left them in debt. They can't pay. They begin to cut corners. The banks are chasing them. So I don't see the great difference if we make. A special fund has to be provided for the airlines that is done as an intervention fund directed at the airlines, not directed at the banks, where the interest rate will be about 2%, between 2 and 7%.
Okay, as
yes,
aviation fund was.
yes, that's what it should be. And I think that during this senior public hearing, the briefing that the Minister of Aviation gave, she said she's already working with the central bank for a new intervention fund specifically meant that was specifically meant for the industry, for the aviation sector, from where the airlines and other members of the sector, businesses in the sector, can draw. That's what should be done. But what was out there, even at that presentation, central bank came and said it was not meant for the airlines. It was meant to stabilize the financial system.
Yeah, but
they were clear.
Where did the story come from that, you know, the money was also given through BOI and that airlines had some very stringent guidelines to meet, and a host of them couldn't meet them. Some who did took the money and used it in other spheres rather than apply them to the airlines themselves.
Look at the structure, look at the architecture of the loan. They got the central bank gave the money to BOI as the manager. Central bank appointed AFC as the advisor, and then no airline could apply direct to BOI. Only the banks can apply to BOI on behalf of the airlines. And the banks can apply to BOI based on the debts the airline is owing. If the airline was not owing any debt or any bank, the bank could not apply for it. So the banks rushed and applied for the debts that the airlines were owing them. So it was directed at the banking system. The airlines could not approach BOI, could not apply directly to BOI. It must be their banks that will apply on their behalf and must show records. What they need to substantiate what they are asking for was the debt, records of the debt being owed.